Hey everyone, welcome back to Void Signal. Before we start, I just want to say thanks for being here. Seriously, whether you've been around for a while or you just clicked on this because the title caught your attention, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you end up enjoying the story, leaving a like or a comment helps a lot more than it probably should, but that's just how YouTube works. And if you're not subscribed yet, feel free to do that too. No pressure, it just helps keep the channel going. All right, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. I'm recording this because Command Protocol demands a narrative log when things go sideways. But I know how this ends, so this isn't for them. It's for whoever finds what's left of us. We touch down at 0300 hours. Rotor wash blasting powdered ice across a landing zone carved straight out of nothing. No lights, no beacons. Just a flat white scar surrounded by darkness so complete it felt like the sky had been erased. The Arctic doesn't welcome you. It tolerates you until it doesn't. My call sign is Rook. Team leader, 1st Special Activities Group. 12 years in theaters where the enemy at least had the decency to bleed. Black Vault was supposed to be different, sterile, contained, already dead. That should have been our first warning. The base entrance sat flush with the ice, a hexagonal hatch half buried by centuries of snowfall, though the briefing said the facility was less than 40 years old. No power signature, no thermal bleed. It looked abandoned in the way a tomb looks abandoned, technically true, functionally misleading. Stack up, I said. 6 operators moved with me, silhouettes swallowed by night vision green. Frost crawled across my visor as the wind screamed low and constant, like something breathing under the ice. We breached. The hatch opened clean. Too clean. No resistance, no pressure differential. Inside, the air was warmer than it had any right to be. Dry, recycled, faintly metallic. Emergency lights flickered on as if woken from a nap. No alarms, no bodies, no signs of struggle. The first corridor stretched long and narrow, walls of reinforced composite lined with cables and conduits still humming with residual power. Coffee cups sat where they'd been left. A jacket hung on a chair. A clipboard lay face down on the floor like it had simply slipped from someone's hand. People don't vanish like that. We cleared room by room. Barracks, mess, medical, command. Everything intact, everything paused. Beds unmade, food half-eaten. Mold creeping along trays like time had resumed, just enough to mock us. "Rook," Vega whispered over comms. "You seeing this?" "I see it," I said, but I didn't understand it. At the center of the facility was the elevator shaft. A vertical throat descending deeper into the ice than the schematics admitted. The access panel beside it bore warning labels in 5 languages, all of them scratched through. Not torn, not burned, deliberately carved away. The elevator still had power. That was the second warning. We descended nearly a kilometer before the doors opened again. The temperature dropped sharply, breath fogging in our helmets. The walls here weren't composite. They weren't metal. They were stone. Black, seamless, polished to a mirror sheen that swallowed our reflections and returned them wrong. Elongated, warped, like we were being viewed through deep water. "Command didn't mention this level," Holt muttered. "Command didn't mention a lot," I said. Then we saw the door. It dominated the chamber, a circular monolith set into the stone wall, at least 30 meters across. No hinges, no seams, no visible mechanism. Its surface wasn't stone or metal or anything I could name. It absorbed light instead of reflecting it, like a hole punched into reality. Symbols covered it, not carved, grown. Patterns that hurt to focus on. Lines that bent in ways my eyes rejected even as my brain tried to follow them. This thing hadn't been built, it had been left, and it was open, not wide, just enough. A vertical eye, a fracture, revealing darkness beyond darkness. A void so deep, my depth perception collapsed trying to measure it. The door had been opened from the inside. No scorch marks, no blast damage, no forced entry, just compliance. That's impossible, Vega said. This thing predates the base, predates the ice. Then why build the facility? Holt asked. The answer crawled up my spine before I could stop it. To watch it. A low vibration passed through the floor. Not mechanical, not seismic. More like pressure, the sensation you get when something massive shifts nearby, unseen. My HUD flickered. Then my radio crackled. Rook, you're not alone. The voice wasn't on our channel. It wasn't any channel. It sounded like one of ours. I raised a fist. Team froze. Who was that? I demanded. No one answered. The darkness beyond the door moved. Not stepped. Not flowed. It noticed us. I realized then what the missing personnel hadn't done. They hadn't fled. They hadn't fought. They had gone inside. And whatever opened that door had decided to come back out. The chamber didn't echo the way it should have. Sound in a concrete room bounces. You learn that without trying. Boot soles, gear straps, a cough. Everything comes back to you with the same shape you threw at the walls. Down here, the noise just died. Like the air was thick or the space was listening and deciding what to keep. I held my fist up, then pointed 2 fingers at Vega and Holt. Vega slid left, hugging the wall. Holt stayed close behind me, rifle up, muzzle tracking the crack in the door. The other 3, Mason, Kincaid, and Juno, fanned out to cover the chamber's corners, checking for secondary entrances that didn't exist on our map. Check comms, I murmured. Juno tapped her earpiece, eyes narrowing. Local interference. It's not jamming, it's layered, like someone's talking through a wet blanket. I stared at the door. The fracture wasn't a simple gap. It looked like a cut in film. The black beyond it wasn't absence of light. It was the absence of the idea of light. Even my optics didn't want to render it. The edges shimmered with a faint distortion, as if reality was struggling to stitch itself closed again. Vega, I said. Thermals. He raised the handheld imager, cycled through bands. His shoulders tightened. Rook, it's cold as hell, but not normal cold. It's reading negative. That's not a thing. Tell the sensor, he muttered. A vibration rolled up through the soles of my boots. Not like a tremor. More like a pressure wave that didn't shake the room, but made my teeth ache in unison. The crack in the door flexed, barely, like something on the other side leaned closer. And then my radio crackled again. Rook. Same voice, same cadence. Mine. I yanked the push to talk, switched channels fast. TeamNet, CommandNet, emergency. Nothing. The voice came through anyway, threaded beneath every frequency like a parasite. You're not alone. My skin prickled under layers of fabric. That wasn't fear alone. It was something older. The part of you that knows when prey has been scented. Everyone hold position, I said. No one speaks into comms unless I ask. If you hear a voice, you do not answer it. Copy? 6 clicks. Tight. Disciplined. I knew these people. I'd seen them calm under fire, steady under blood. But now I watched their posture, micro-tensions, the slight elevation of shoulders, like they were all trying not to breathe too loudly. The door wanted something. Or someone did. I stepped back from the fracture and turned toward the equipment alcove we'd passed on the way in. Black Vault didn't just have one chamber. It had an entire ring of rooms around this central vault, like petals around an eye. Most were empty storage bays, but one had been converted into a monitoring station. That's where the base personnel would have watched the door, logged readings, prayed they never saw it move. The station looked abandoned in the same way the upper levels did, mid-motion. A chair was tipped sideways, as if someone stood too quickly and didn't bother to set it right. A mug sat beside a terminal, a skin of frozen coffee clinging to its rim. The screens were dead, but a portable drive lay on the console, tagged in marker. Daily logs, do not remove. I pocketed it without thinking. Holt noticed. You think that'll still read? It has to, I said. Otherwise we're blind. Juno crouched by the console, running gloved fingers over the equipment. This isn't standard military. Half of this looks like research grade. Look at these ports, custom adapters. Meaning? Mason asked. Meaning someone built this station around something they didn't fully understand. I turned back toward the door. The fracture was still there, a vertical wound. But now, in the corner of my vision, I kept catching movement. Not in the gap, around it. The door's surface was matte black and covered in those grown symbols. But in certain angles it seemed to ripple, as if the material was not solid, but only pretending. Rook, Vega whispered. The markings, they're shifting. Your eyes are shifting, Kincaid muttered, trying to sound like a skeptic and failing. Vega didn't blink. No, I mean shifting. They're not in the same place. I took a snapshot on my HUD. Look. He sent the still image to my display. I saw it. Etched patterns clustered around the fracture. Then I looked up. The clusters had migrated, like a school of dark fish circling a hook. My mouth went dry. Back, I said quietly. Everyone, back 10 meters. Slow. We retreated in sync, muzzles never leaving the door. The closer we got to the room's outer boundary, the more my ears started to ring, like the chamber had a pressure gradient and we'd been standing too close to the center of it. The fracture widened a fraction. Not much. A breath. A blink. But I saw it, and Vega saw it, and Holt saw it, because he swore under his breath in a way he would have denied later. From the gap, a shape emerged. Thin, pale, wrong. At first, I thought it was a hand. Then I realized it had too many joints. The fingers were segmented like insect legs, bending in ways bones don't. The skin looked like old wax, translucent enough that dark channels pulsed beneath it, circulation that didn't match any human anatomy. It reached into the room, paused as if tasting the air, then slowly withdrew. Contact, Kincaid whispered. Not yet, I said. No shots unless it crosses the line. Crosses what line? Mason asked, voice tight. The line where it becomes killable, I said, and hated how useless that sounded. The door's fracture did something that made my stomach drop. It blinked. Not literally, but the edges tightened and loosened like a lid. The void beyond shifted, and for half a second the black wasn't just black. It held depth, layered darkness with faint contours, like a corridor receding into infinity. And in that half second I saw silhouettes. Dozens. Standing inside, facing outward. Some were human-shaped. Some were not. But all of them were still, as if waiting for permission. My grip clenched so hard my knuckles hurt. Then the silhouettes were gone. The fracture returned to a simple wound, motionless again. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Rook, Holt said finally, barely above a breath. Tell me you saw that. I saw it, I said. Juno's voice cracked slightly. Those were people. They're not people anymore, Kincaid answered, and for once his cynicism sounded like mercy. The practical part of my brain tried to regain control. Threat assessment, options, extraction. The mission hadn't been to open anything. It had been to locate missing personnel, secure sensitive material, and determine what caused the blackout. But now the primary question wasn't where the base staff went, it was why the door had opened, and why, after it opened, the base remained neatly undisturbed, as if nobody had fought because nobody had needed to, because they'd gone willingly. I keyed my mic to command again, ignoring my own rule. Overwatch, this is Rook. We have eyes on the anomaly. It is... I hesitated, searching for language that wouldn't get me laughed at if anyone ever heard this later. It is active. Door breach confirmed. Unknown entities present beyond the threshold. Request immediate extraction and containment assets. Static answered. Not the normal dead channel hiss. A softer sound like breath across a phone line. Then, clear as day, my own voice again. Closer now, intimate, like someone leaning in to whisper a secret. Rook, you can come home. My throat tightened. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe, because something in that phrase snagged in my head. Home. Not the base. Not the aircraft. Not the world above. It meant something else. It meant the place behind the door. Vega's eyes went wide behind his visor. It's using you. It's fishing, I said. It wants us to talk back. How do you know? Mason asked. I stared at the fracture. Because it's not forcing its way out. As if in response, the door's symbols drifted again, tightening around the gap like muscles contracting around a wound. The pressure in the room rose, my ears popped. Then, somewhere deeper in the facility, beyond this chamber, down one of the black stone corridors, we heard a sound that didn't belong. A boot step. Slow, deliberate, human cadence. We snapped our rifles toward the corridor's mouth. Lights caught the polished stone and made it look like a throat. The step came again, closer this time. Whoever it was wasn't running, wasn't hiding, wasn't afraid. A figure emerged into the edge of our beams, a person in base-issued, parka and insulated trousers, face hidden under a hood rimmed with frost. Their posture was upright, steady, like someone walking a familiar hallway. Holt's voice was sharp. Identify. The figure stopped, then lifted its head. The hood fell back, and I felt something inside me go cold in a way the Arctic couldn't compete with. Because the face looking at us was mine. Same scar above the left brow from a training jump years ago. Same broken capillary at the edge of the nostril. Same eyes. But the expression was wrong. Too calm. Too still. Like a mask held in place by something learning how to be human. It smiled. Not with warmth, with recognition. Rook, it said out loud in my voice without a radio. You finally made it. For a fraction of a second, my brain did what it always does when the world stops making sense. It tried to make it make sense anyway. Cold hallucination, stress-induced pareidolia, some trick of lighting on a half-frozen corpse. Anything but the obvious. But it wasn't a corpse. It wasn't a shadow. It moved with muscle memory. It breathed, slowly, deliberately, like it had learned breathing was something humans did when they wanted to look alive. My face looked back at me. My voice came from its mouth. And the most terrifying part wasn't the mimicry. It was the calm. Weapons on, I said, and my own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. No one fires unless I say, Holt, tag it with the laser. Holt's rifle-mounted designator painted a red dot on the center of my duplicate's forehead. The dot didn't shake. Holt was steady. He always was. The thing didn't flinch. It just smiled wider, showing teeth that were the right shape, but the wrong color. Too pale, too uniform, like they'd been carved from bone and polished. Rook, Vega hissed, barely moving his lips. That's not... I know what it isn't, I said. The copy took one step forward. My team tensed as one organism. Muzzles rose a hair, fingers tightened on triggers. The room filled with the subtle mechanical clicks of safeties nudged and grips adjusted. In any other situation, that sound would have made an intruder freeze. This thing kept walking. I lifted my hand, palm out. Stop. It stopped instantly, as if my command was a string tied around its limbs. That was wrong. Even trained operators need a beat to process and comply. This was obedience without cognition, like a puppet responding to its puppeteer. Who are you? I demanded. It tilted its head with a slow curiosity. The gesture was mine. I did it when I listened to a briefing that didn't add up. I'm you, it said. The part that went missing when you decided you were only one thing. Kincaid made a sound in the back of his throat, half laugh, half panic. Oh, hell no. The copy's gaze slid past my rifle, past Holt's laser dot, and landed on Kincaid with a kind of patient interest. "Kincaid," it said softly, "you still sleep on your left side even though it hurts the old break. You tell yourself it's a habit. It's not. It's penance." Kincaid stiffened. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. That was a detail no one should have known. Not even me. Then the copy looked at Juno. "Juniper," it said, using her full first name. "You keep the ring in your sock drawer because you don't trust your own memory. You're afraid if you wear it, it'll become real again." Juno's rifle dipped an inch before she caught herself. "Shut up." The copy smiled, as if she'd confirmed something. Then it looked at Vega. "Miguel, you pretend you're not scared of the dark because you joined a job that lives in it, but you still count the seconds between the light switch and your bed when you're alone." Vega's eyes widened. His breathing sped up, fogging his visor. I felt the room tightening. Not physically, but psychologically, like the air was shrinking around our lungs. This thing wasn't just wearing my face. It was wearing our secrets. "Enough," I snapped. "Back away." It held up both hands in a placating gesture, my gesture, the one I used in hostage situations, palms open, non-threatening. "I'm not here to hurt you," it said. "I'm here because the door is open now." The base went silent because they finally stopped pretending the seal was sacred. They listened. They stepped through. They were welcomed. Holt's voice came out like gravel. "Where are they?" The copy's smile softened into something almost sympathetic. "Where they belong." "Answer the question," I said. It took a slow breath and exhaled like it enjoyed the taste of the room. "They're inside the archive." "Archive," Mason repeated. "What archive?" The copy turned its head slightly toward the black door. The fracture pulsed faintly, as if it heard itself being acknowledged. "Not a place," it said. "A function, a stomach, a library, a memory field. Call it whatever helps you keep your hands steady." I swallowed the sudden dryness in my throat. "Why did you come out?" It looked back at me, and for the first time the expression on my own face unsettled me in a new way. There was hunger there. Not animal hunger, not even human hunger. Curiosity without mercy. "Because you came," it said simply, "and because the ice can't hold forever." Behind it, deeper in the corridor it had emerged from, I saw movement. Faint, just at the edge of our light. A flicker like someone leaning around a corner and pulling back. Then another. Holt saw it too. His barrel twitched. The copy spoke before any of us could. "Don't do that!" The words weren't shouted, they were certain. The tone of someone telling a child not to touch a hot stove, not out of kindness, but because the result would be inconvenient. I tightened my grip. "What else is here?" The copy blinked, slow. When it opened its eyes, the pupils were slightly wrong, too wide, like the black in them was expanding. "Everything that has ever knocked," it said. "Everything that has ever been refused. Everything that has ever been buried under ice and prayer and classified budgets." The pressure in my ears climbed again, a sensation like descending underwater. My HUD flickered, overlaying a faint shimmer across the copy's body, and for a split second I saw something beneath the skin. Structures like braided cable, pulsing with dim light, running in spirals that didn't match veins. Then the HUD corrected itself, and the illusion of my face returned. "Rook," Juno whispered, voice tight with controlled panic. "We need to leave. Now." I agreed with her. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to pull back to the elevator, to get above the stone level and into familiar metal corridors, even if they were haunted by absence. But my duplicate stood between us and the corridor we needed to take to reach the elevator shaft. It hadn't blocked us yet, but I could feel the implication like a knife laid gently on a table. It didn't need to block us. It could ask us to stop, and some part of us might obey. "Move aside," I said. The copy frowned, my frown, The one I wore when I was tired of bad faith negotiations. You don't want to go yet. I do, I said. No, it corrected gently. You want to believe you do. But you came all this way, through cold and secrecy and fear, because some part of you already heard the door calling. My stomach clenched. The door didn't call me. It smiled again. Then why are you here? I almost answered. Almost told it the obvious mission parameters, the objective language, the safe story. But in that moment, I realized something that made my blood cool. It didn't care about my explanation. It cared about the moment I chose to speak. Because speaking was connection. Speaking was permission. I shut my mouth and raised my hand in a tight signal. Fall back. Silent. No comms. No words. We started to retreat. The copy didn't follow. Instead, it turned its head slowly toward the door. The fracture widened another fraction, and the darkness beyond it deepened like a pupil dilating. In the gap, the silhouettes reappeared. Not dozens this time, but hundreds, layered behind each other like reflections in a mirror hall. Some were wearing base uniforms, some wore parkas, some wore nothing at all, but still stood upright, arranged with a terrible patience. And among them, I recognized one face that wasn't mine. A woman. Base personnel. Paramedic patch on her shoulder. Eyes wide. Mouth open like she was trying to scream through glass. Her skin looked too thin, stretched over something moving inside. Her gaze locked onto mine. And then her lips formed a word without sound. Help. The copy looked back at me, still smiling. She can't, it said, as if answering a question I hadn't spoken. Not the way you mean, but you can. Holt's laser dot trembled for the first time. Rook, he whispered, breaking silence. That's... The copy's head snapped toward him, and the room's pressure spiked. Holt stiffened, as if an invisible hand had gripped his spine. The laser dot jerked wildly across the copy's face, then slammed down to the floor. Holt's rifle slipped from his hands. He didn't drop it like he'd been disarmed. He dropped it like his hands forgot what holding was. His arms sagged. His mouth opened. His eyes went unfocused. Don't, the copy said softly. No more sound. The archive likes sound. Holt's lips moved silently for a moment, trembling. Then his throat made a wet, strangled noise. Not speech, not a scream, a cough that ended in a thin stream of dark fluid spilling from the corner of his mouth. I lunged toward him, grabbing his vest, dragging him back despite the weight of his gear. His eyes found mine for half a second, and in that half a second, I saw pure terror. Not of death, of being red. Then his pupils dilated, and he went limp in my grip. Medical! I snapped, forgetting the rules, forgetting the door, forgetting everything except the fact that one of my people was collapsing in my arms. Juno surged forward, reaching for Holt's neck. The copy's smile widened. Yes, it said, pleased. That's it. Keep talking. Juno's gloves pressed into Holt's neck seal, fingertips searching for a pulse through layers of insulated fabric. Her eyes were wide, focused, professional, trying to make the moment smaller by turning it into procedure. Pulse is, she began. Holt's body jerked. Not a convulsion, not seizure tremor. A precise, single twitch that pulled his shoulders back and arched his spine like an invisible line had hooked behind his sternum and yanked. His mouth opened, and a voice came out. Not his. My voice. Rook, it said through Holt's throat, wet and strained. You have to stop fighting the current. Juno recoiled so fast she nearly fell backward. Vega swore, breaking into a half-step toward Holt with his rifle up before he caught himself. I gripped Holt's vest harder, trying to hold him down like weight mattered. Holt! I barked. Look at me! Fight it! Holt's eyes rolled, then snapped forward, focused, aware, terrified. For a second I saw him in there. His lips trembled. "I can't," he rasped. Then his jaw unhinged wider than it should have. Not dislocated, relaxed, as if the muscles had decided the bones were optional. The sound that poured from him wasn't a scream. It was like a radio being tuned, sliding across frequencies, sampling voices, female, male, child. A dozen tones braided together, rising into a single note that made my molars ache. The copy of me watched from the corridor entrance with the calm patience of a scientist observing an expected reaction. The door's fracture pulsed again, synchronized with Holt's throat. I understood then. The base hadn't gone silent because communications failed. The base had gone silent because the door learned to speak. "Juno," I snapped, forcing my voice low. "Seal his airway. Inject if you have to." She hesitated, eyes flicking to the copy, then to the black door, then back to Holt's mouth. Too wide, too wrong. "I can't intubate in this gear," she said, voice breaking. We need him alive," I cut in. "Do what you can." She drew a syringe from her kit, hands shaking just enough to show she was human. She plunged it into Holt's neck port. A sedative cocktail, fast-acting, enough to drop a man in seconds. It didn't. Holt's pupils narrowed instead, as if whatever was inside him didn't appreciate being disrupted. The braided voices surged once more. Then Holt's teeth snapped shut. Hard. Blood sprayed the inside of his visor. Not a lot. Just a fine mist, like a warning. His body went slack again. Juno's hands hovered uncertainly, then pressed back to his throat. Pulses faint, breathing shallow. I didn't let go of Holt's vest. Something in me kept expecting him to be yanked away again like a hooked fish. The copy took a step forward. My team's rifles snapped up in a unified motion, every muzzle tracking center mass. The copy stopped. Immediately, smile unchanged. "Easy," it said. "You're doing so well." Vega's voice shook with controlled rage. "What the hell are you?" The copy looked genuinely pleased, like Vega had offered a compliment. "I'm the part of you that answers when something older calls," it said. "And I'm not alone." I tightened my jaw. Back away from my team. The copy's gaze dropped to Holt, then returned to me. He's already halfway across. I didn't understand that at first. Then I felt it. The subtle shift in the air pressure around Holt, like a draft pulling toward the door. "Not physically," the copy added almost kindly. "Not yet." Kincaid's voice came out sharp. "Rook, we need to put rounds in that thing." "You can try," the copy said, turning its head toward Kincaid. "But you'll only prove a point the archive already knows." I didn't want a firefight in this room. Not because I feared losing, because I feared winning. Because if this thing wasn't made of flesh, bullets weren't going to solve it. They'd just confirm we were violent animals in a cage, and cages always have rules. We didn't know the rules. "Vega," I said, "flash it." Vega slapped a flashbang from his rig, thumbed it live, and tossed it low across the floor. The grenade skittered, bounced once, and landed near the copy's boots. It should have detonated with a sharp crack and blinding light. Instead, it made a soft sound, like a finger tapping glass. The casing dented inward as if squeezed. Then the grenade simply collapsed. Light and sound died inside it, swallowed whole. Vega stared, horrified. "That's not possible." The copy shrugged with my shoulders. "Everything is possible when the door is open." A low, distant thump rolled through the facility, not from the chamber, but from above, like ice shifting under a great weight. Then another, then a series of smaller vibrations, traveling down the stone corridors like footsteps of something enormous repositioning itself. Mason's voice came tight. "Rook, you hearing that?" "I'm hearing it," I said, and I hated how familiar it sounded, because it didn't sound like a creature approaching. It sounded like a mechanism waking up. I dragged Holt's limp body back another meter. "We're leaving. Now. Carry Holt." Kincaid and Mason moved in, taking Holt's arms and legs, moving him with the practiced efficiency of men who have hauled injured comrades under fire. The copy didn't stop us. It just watched, like a teacher letting students walk out of class so they could realize the hallway was part of the lesson. As we retreated down the corridor, my light caught more of the black stone walls. The material wasn't just polished, it had depth, tiny specks inside it, like suspended ash or distant stars. When my beam moved, those specks moved too, shifting in patterns that suggested attention. The corridor curved in a way that didn't match the architecture above. Not a normal curve. A curve that made my sense of direction slip, like walking around the inside of a sphere. Juno kept glancing back over her shoulder, like she expected the copy to pursue. It did, but slowly, at a measured distance, always in view, like it wanted us to remember it was there. We reached the elevator bay. The doors were open, waiting. The elevator car sat inside, lights dead, a dark rectangle that suddenly looked like another doorway. "Get him in," I ordered. Kincaid and Mason heaved Holt into the car. Juno climbed in after them, immediately checking Holt's vitals again. I stepped in last, keeping my rifle trained down the corridor. The copy stopped at the corridor mouth, just beyond the elevator bay's threshold. It didn't cross into the elevator area. Not yet. That was something. A boundary. I hit the panel. Nothing. The buttons didn't light. I slapped the emergency toggle. Still nothing. The elevator had brought us down here. It should have brought us up, but now it was a dead box. Vega's voice rose. "Rook, it's not responding." "I see that," I said, jaw clenched. A soft sound came from behind the copy. More footsteps in the darkness. Slow, human cadence. Another figure emerged behind it, then another, like a line forming. They wore base uniforms, parkas, thermal gear. Their faces were wrong, not distorted, not monstrous, just incomplete. Like sculptures still waiting for final detailing. Features too smooth, eyes too reflective, mouths that held expressions one beat behind the moment. The copy's smile widened. "They followed you. They like you." My team raised rifles, tracking the growing cluster. "Don't shoot," I snapped instantly. "Not yet," Kincaid's voice cracked. "Rook, they're right there." "Not yet," I repeated, because my instincts were screaming something deeper than fear. These weren't targets. They were messages. The copy stepped closer, stopping just outside the elevator bay's boundary. "How many people were stationed here?" it asked, conversational. 42? 48? They all took their turn. They all stepped through. Each one left a fingerprint in the archive. You can hear them if you listen. The braided voices rose faintly from the corridor behind it, like distant choir practice, like radios in a junkyard, all playing different stations at once. Juno spoke from inside the elevator, voice trembling with anger. "What do you want?" The copy turned its head toward her. I felt my stomach drop because it looked at her the way a person looks at a door they want to open. "I want you to understand," it said. "This base wasn't built to protect the world from what's behind the door." It paused, savoring the next part. "It was built to protect the door from the world." Another deep thump traveled through the walls. This time the elevator shook. Dust drifted from seams in the stone ceiling. Mason looked up, eyes wide. "Something's moving above us." "No," Vega whispered. "It's moving the ice." The copy leaned in slightly, voice almost tender. "The seal is failing. The ice is remembering its original shape." My blood went cold. The ice wasn't just a cover, it was pressure. A lid, a hand over a mouth. And that hand was loosening. The copy lifted its palm and placed it against the black stone wall beside the elevator bay. Fingers splayed. The wall pulsed faintly beneath its touch, like living tissue reacting to contact. Then, inside the elevator, Holt's body jerked again. Juno screamed, grabbing for him as his head snapped up. His visor was fogged with blood. His mouth opened, normal this time, thank God, but his eyes were wide and locked onto me with a frantic intelligence. He spoke in a hoarse whisper. "Rook, it's not outside." He swallowed, coughing wet. "It's under all of it." The elevator lights flickered on, all at once, bright white. The buttons lit. The car chimed softly, cheerfully, like a hotel elevator welcoming guests. And the doors began to close, with me still outside. Juno lunged forward, arms shooting out to catch the edge of the door. The closing mechanism pushed against her glove with mechanical certainty. She looked at me through her visor, eyes wide with panic. "Rook!" I grabbed the door edge with both hands, trying to force it open. The motor fought me, not like a normal motor, like something determined. Behind me, the copy watched with a serene smile. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Because the elevator wasn't leaving without me. It was leaving to take them away from me. And for the first time, the copy spoke without using my voice. It spoke with a layered tone, 40 voices at once, like the archive. Itself had leaned forward to speak through its mouth. "One must stay." The elevator doors bit into my gloves like teeth. Juno's arm was wedged between the panels, elbow locked, shoulder trembling under the motor's steady push. The mechanism didn't stutter the way safety systems should. It didn't detect resistance. It didn't care. It just kept closing. I jammed my fingers into the narrowing seam and pulled with everything I had, boots braced against the black stone floor. The doors flexed a millimeter, then snapped back, as if the metal had a memory of being shut. "Stop!" I shouted into the car, even though the word felt like blood in the water. Holt's head lolled, then lifted again. His visor was smeared inside with red. He looked like a man waking up underwater. Mason and Kincaid grabbed Juno's harness and yanked her backward, trying to save her arm before the doors took it clean. The panels squeezed tighter. Juno screamed. Not from pain yet, from certainty. That scream echoed down the corridor behind me, and I felt the air change. A subtle shift, like something inhaled. The copy didn't move. It stood at the edge of the elevator bay's boundary, watching the struggle with an expression that was almost gentle. It had said, "One must stay." The words weren't a threat the way threats usually are. There was no anger behind it, no negotiation. It felt like a rule, a toll. I could hear the braided voices now, faint but growing, seeping from the corridor like cold fog. Under them, deeper, was a pulse, slow and heavy, like the heartbeat of the ice itself. "Rook!" Vega yelled from inside the car. "Get in!" If I tried, I'd have to wedge myself in between Juno and the door. The space wasn't wide enough, and even if I managed, the door would just keep closing, crushing whoever was in the way. We needed a different force. My eyes snapped to the copy. It had triggered this, not by touching the elevator directly, but by touching the wall, like it had authority here. I released the door seam and raised my rifle, aiming center mass at my own face across the bay. The team froze mid-struggle. Even the elevator motor seemed to pause for half a beat, like it was curious. "Open it," I said. The copy blinked slowly. "You don't want to hurt yourself." "I'm not you," I growled. "Open the door." The copy's smile didn't falter. "Threats don't apply the way you think they do." I pulled the selector to full auto. The click was loud in the dead air. "Try me." A low, amused sound came from the copy's throat. It wasn't laughter. It was the sound a glacier makes when it decides to move. Patient, inevitable. "You still think this is about force," it said. "You still think you can pull your people out like a rope from a pit." Behind me, the elevator doors tightened again. Juno's scream turned into a strangled grunt. The panels were inches from her elbow now. Another second, and "Rook!" she cried, voice sharp with pain. "I snapped. I fired. The muzzle flash lit the chamber in harsh strobes. 3-round burst, controlled, trained. The rounds crossed the short distance and struck the copy's chest exactly where I aimed. There was no blood, no recoil. The bullets didn't even ricochet. They hit the copy's torso and sank in like stones into thick mud, leaving shallow depressions that slowly smoothed over. The copy looked down at its chest with mild interest. Then it looked back up at me and smiled wider. "That's what the archive likes," it said softly. Confirmation. A pressure wave rolled through the room. Not a shock wave, an idea of weight slamming down. My knees buckled. Vega shouted inside the elevator as the car shuddered. The walls vibrated with that deep thump again, closer now, like something massive had shifted right behind the stone. The elevator doors paused, then began to open. Not because the safety system engaged, because something allowed it. Juno yanked her, arm free, and stumbled backward, clutching it to her chest. Kincaid caught her. Mason swore, eyes wild. The doors opened fully. The car was lit bright and sterile, like an operating room. "Go!" I barked. They hesitated for a fraction, because leaving without me is not something operators do. Not unless they're ordered. "Now!" I roared, and the command in my voice broke through whatever paralysis had gripped them. Mason and Kincaid hauled Holt deeper into the car. Vega grabbed Juno's harness and pulled her in. The last thing I saw before the doors started closing again was Juno turning back toward me, eyes glossy with rage and terror. "Rook!" The doors slid shut. I lunged forward, grabbing for the seam again. But this time, it wasn't resisting. It wasn't trying to crush me. It was simply closing, sealing. The car chimed once and began to ascend, taking my team, my only lifeline, up into the metal levels above, leaving me alone with the door and my duplicate and a corridor full of almost people. The elevator shaft swallowed the sound of their ascent until even that was gone. Silence returned. Not normal silence, the kind that feels deliberate. I stood in the bay with my rifle raised and my breath loud in my helmet. The copy watched me like it had been waiting for this exact configuration. "Good," it said. "Now we can talk without them flinching." "You did that," I said, voice tight. "You forced the elevator." I reminded the system what it was built for, the copy corrected. Containment is not a lock, it's a ritual. My pulse hammered. "Where are they going?" "Up," it said. "To the level where you can pretend your world is still yours. And me." The copy tilted its head. "You stay." I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Why?" It looked almost pleased by the question. "Because you're the part of them that can take the weight. You're the anchor. Without an anchor, the archive takes everyone." I stared at it. "So it's a trade. 1 life for 6. "Not a trade," it said. "A balance." The door opened from inside because the inside was full. Too full. It needed space. The braided voices in the corridor swelled, like wind through a hollow pipe. I took a step back toward the elevator controls, hand reaching for the emergency manual override. If I could bring it back down. The copy's eyes sharpened. The temperature dropped instantly, frosting the edges of my visor. The air felt heavier. I froze. "Don't," it said, gentle again. In the corridor behind it, the unfinished-faced base personnel shifted forward in unison. Their movements were too synchronized, like a school of fish turning at once. I raised my rifle toward them. None of them reacted. Their eyes were wrong, not because they were blank, but because they reflected too much, like black mirrors. When my light hit them, I saw quick flashes, images that weren't in the room. A birthday candle, a hospital corridor, a desert at night. My mother's hands, my first kill, my memories, thrown back at me like bait. I clenched my teeth hard enough to hurt. "Get out of my head." The copy spread its hands. "We're not in your head is in the archive." Another deep thump, closer still. Dust drifted from the ceiling seams. Far above, something groaned. ice under strain. The facility itself felt like it was adjusting, aligning to a new purpose. The copy stepped forward. This time it crossed the elevator bay boundary without hesitation. That boundary had been mine to notice, not a law. It stopped an arm's length away, close enough that my light illuminated every detail of my own face. Pores, stubble, the faint scar line, and something else. Beneath its skin, the faint braided structures pulsed again, visible now without HUD distortion, like cables, like nerves, like roots. It leaned in. "Listen," it whispered. "They're safe, for now. But you can't save them by running. You save them by learning what the seal was." My throat felt tight. What was it? The copy's smile softened into something that almost looked like pity. "The base," it said. "The ice, the budgets, the secrecy. All of it was a finger in the dike." It glanced toward the black door. "But you were always meant to be the plug." I lifted my rifle, muzzle inches from its forehead. It didn't blink. "Back off," I said. It exhaled slowly. "Do you feel it yet? The pull?" And that's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. I did. Not like gravity, like familiarity. Like standing on the edge of a room you used to live in, smelling a scent you forgot you missed. The fracture in the door pulsed again. For half a second, the void beyond showed depth. And within that depth, I saw a shape I hadn't noticed before. Not a silhouette, a structure, something like a spiral staircase made of darkness, descending forever. And I knew, without knowing how, that it led to a place that had my name written into it long before I was born. My radio crackled, faint, distorted, like it was fighting its way through layers. "Rook, this is Overwatch." A real voice, maybe. A human voice. Thin, distant. Hope flared in my chest so hard it hurt. I keyed the mic, hands shaking. "Overwatch, copy." The copy's hand touched my wrist. Not hard, not forceful, just contact. And my radio filled with voices. Not one, many. The base personnel. The unfinished-faced figures. Holt. My own voice. Children. Whispers. All speaking at once. All saying the same phrase in different tones. "Come home." I ripped my hand away from the mic, tearing the earpiece out of my helmet. Silence slammed in, sudden and brutal. But the words didn't stop, because they weren't coming through the comms anymore. They were coming through me. I realized then that separating me from the team wasn't just strategy, it was preparation. The copy nodded, as if confirming my realization. "Good," it said. "Now you can hear the door the way they did." The unfinished-faced figures took another synchronized step forward, and behind them, in the corridor shadows, something taller shifted, something that didn't bother wearing a human shape at all. I raised my rifle. My hands were steady. My soul was not. The thing in the corridor didn't step into the light. It didn't need to. It just shifted, and the shadow it cast moved the wrong way, like a sundial pointing at a different sun. My beams scraped across the polished black stone and came back dimmer, as if the air itself had decided light was a resource it could ration. The unfinished-faced figures advanced another synchronized pace. Their boots made no sound, no scuff, no crunch. Just a quiet certainty, like mannequins being slid across a showroom floor. The copy stayed close, standing at my shoulder, as if we were partners. "Don't waste your ammunition," it murmured. I kept my rifle up anyway. Training doesn't switch off just because the universe does. "Where's the manual override?" I asked, more to myself than to it. The elevator controls had a maintenance panel. Most systems have physical fail-safes. Someone had built this facility. Humans had to have included something that wasn't dependent on whatever this was. The copy's head turned slightly, listening to something I couldn't hear. "It's already decided," it said. "Shut up," I snapped. Everything has a switch. It looked at me with my eyes and smiled like a parent letting a child insist on magic. Then find it. A deep thump rolled through the stone again, closer than before. The ceiling dusted fine particles. Somewhere above, metal groaned. The ice wasn't just shifting, it was being repositioned, like a lid being lifted with slow, careful hands. I backed toward the elevator bay console, keeping the corridor in my peripheral. The unfinished-faced group halted at the corridor mouth, as if an invisible line had been drawn and they were content to wait on it. But the taller thing behind them leaned forward. My light caught it for half a second. It wasn't wearing a face. It wasn't even wearing a body in the way I understood bodies. It was a vertical arrangement of angles, like a stack of folded shadows, each layer slightly offset from the one beneath. It occupied space the way a knot occupies rope, compressed, tense, made of potential. I tried to focus on it and my vision slipped. My brain rejected the geometry like an allergic reaction. I looked away fast. The copy watched me like it had seen this reaction 1,000 times. "Your mind is trying to keep you intact," it said. "That's admirable." I dug my fingers into the maintenance panel seam and yanked. The cover came loose with a metallic snap. Inside, wiring, relays, a manual crank handle sealed in place with a red tag that read, "Authorized personnel only. Good." I tore the tag and grabbed the crank. It was stiff, cold, mechanical, comforting. I started turning. At first, nothing happened. Then the elevator shaft responded with a low whine, and somewhere above, cables shifted. The car's position indicator, a small analog gauge I hadn't noticed before, trembled. A spark of relief hit me so hard, almost laughed. The copy's smile faded slightly. "You're persistent," it said, as if that was a flaw. I kept turning. "I'm getting my team back." "You can't," it replied, tone gentle. "The system brought them up because it still remembers its mission. The archive hasn't overwritten that level yet." "Yet," I echoed. The copy nodded. "You feel it. The base is a mind. The door is a thought inside it. Thoughts spread." The gauge shifted. A fraction, but real. The elevator car was moving downward again, slow and grudging. I didn't stop cranking. Then the voices started. Not in my ear, not through comms, inside the cavity behind my eyes, like a pressure building in my skull. At first they were whispers, words I couldn't catch. Then they became distinct, forming sentences that didn't connect, as if someone was flipping through radio stations again. "He's here. Don't let him leave. Tell him we tried." A child's voice, too clear. "Dad." My hands hesitated on the crank. My daughter's voice. It hadn't been her in years. She was alive, back home, safe. I had video calls. I had proof. But the sound of her saying that one word, "Dad," hit a part of me that didn't care about proof. My throat tightened. The copy leaned in, voice soft. "That's the hook. The archive doesn't lie. It doesn't need to. It only returns what you already carry." I forced my hands to keep turning. "It's not her." "It could be," the copy whispered, "if you step through." I slammed my elbow into the crank to keep it moving, using pain to anchor myself. The metal bit into my forearm. I welcomed it. The gauge crept further. Behind me, the taller angular thing in the corridor shifted again. The unfinished-faced figures parted slightly, like a curtain being drawn. The shape advanced one pace, and the air itself bent around it. The temperature plunged. Frost raced across the stone floor in branching patterns, like veins spreading through skin. My breath caught. My lungs felt smaller, like the room was squeezing. I kept cranking. The elevator shaft groaned in protest. Then the copy raised a hand, not toward me, but toward the wall. The black stone pulsed under its palm like a living organ. The gauge stopped moving. The crank seized, locking in my hands. I tried to force it. The handle didn't budge. I looked up at the copy, rage flashing hot even through the cold. "Don't!" It turned to me slowly. My face on its face looked disappointed. "You're not listening." "I'm listening," I snarled. "I'm just not obeying." "That's the mistake," it said. "You still think obedience is weakness. Down here, obedience is physics." I yanked harder, putting my weight into the crank. Something in the mechanism snapped. Not the crank, my hope. The handle didn't break. The panel didn't give. Instead, the metal beneath my hands went soft for a moment, like warm wax, then re-hardened. When I tried to pull back, my glove stuck to it, fused by a thin layer of ice that hadn't been there a second before. The copy watched. "The base doesn't want you to call them back." "Why?" I demanded. It stepped closer, lowering its voice like it was sharing something sacred. "Because if they come down again, they won't go back up." The unfinished-faced figures began to hum. A low, collective tone, not musical. A resonance, like a tuning fork struck gently but endlessly. The sound vibrated in my teeth. The fracture in the door pulsed in sync with that hum. The taller, angular thing moved again, closer now, and my vision blurred around its edges as if my eyes were trying to slide away from it. I forced myself to look at it anyway. The moment I did, the room changed. Not physically, conceptually. For an instant, the corridor wasn't a corridor. It was a throat, and the figures weren't people, but cilia, tiny hairs lining an organ designed to filter and guide. And the angular thing was the tongue. It tasted the air. It tasted me. My stomach turned. I fought the urge to gag. The copy's voice cut through, crisp. "It knows you now." I tore my gloves off, leaving them stuck to the crank, and backed away, hands bare in the freezing air. Pain stabbed instantly, skin burning cold. I raised my rifle again, aiming not at the copy, but at the corridor. The unfinished-faced figures didn't react. The angular thing leaned forward. I fired. Full auto. The rounds stitched into the group. Bodies jerked, spun, fell. Except they didn't fall like humans. They folded like paper, collapsing in clean angles. Then, unfolded again. Bullet holes sealed as if the material was self-healing clay. The sound of gunfire didn't echo. It was swallowed, and the hum grew louder, pleased. I stopped firing, breath ragged. The copy exhaled like it had predicted this. "You see?" The unfinished-faced figures stepped forward together, closing the distance in a wave. Not rushing, not attacking, approaching, inviting. And through their blank reflective eyes, I began to see things again. Memories, scenes, images. A training range in Georgia, my first deployment. A man's face in a doorway lit by muzzle flash. The moment I chose the shot, the moment I didn't. The archive wasn't just reading me, it was cataloging me, indexing. I retreated until my back hit the elevator bay wall. Cold stone pressed into my spine. My hands were numb, fingers stiff on the rifle grip. I keyed my mic by reflex, then remembered the earpiece was gone. No comms, no team. Just me in the door and the chorus of borrowed voices. The copy stepped closer again, lowering its head until its mouth was near my ear. Its breath was cold and smelled faintly of metal and old paper. "You can still choose," it whispered. "You can stay and be ground down until you're nothing but a record. Or you can step through and become the kind of thing that doesn't beg." I stared past it at the door. The fracture widened a hair more. Darkness beyond it deepened, revealing that spiral descent again, like a staircase made for something that didn't need feet. And from inside that depth, something moved upward, slow and careful, as if it had all the time in the world. A shape larger than the doorway should contain. A presence that made the symbols on the door ripple like skin. The hum reached a peak. The unfinished-faced figures stopped, heads tilting in unison toward the crack. like worshippers hearing their God approach. The copy's voice softened into something reverent. "It's coming to greet you," it said. A final deep thump rolled through the facility, and the floor dipped under my boots by a fraction, like the entire base had exhaled. Somewhere above, ice cracked, loud, distant, catastrophic. And then, from the fracture, a voice came that wasn't layered and wasn't borrowed. It was singular, ancient, and it spoke my name the way a book speaks a title. Rook, not as a call, as a claim. When it said my name, the chamber didn't just get colder, it got closer. That's the only way I can describe it. Like space itself leaned in, like the black stone walls were no longer walls, but the inside of a clenched fist. The hum from the unfinished faced figures tightened into a higher pitch that made my vision shimmer at the edges. I swallowed against a throat gone dry. "Who are you?" I forced out, because silence felt like surrender and speech felt like poison, and I was stuck between two kinds of drowning. The fracture in the door widened another hair. The darkness beyond it shifted, and the spiral staircase I'd seen before became clearer, descending down into a depth that wasn't measured in meters, but in layers. Each step looked like a slice of shadow stacked on the next. The air near the crack moved in slow currents, as if something massive was breathing on the other side. "Rook," the voice repeated, not louder, more certain. The copy at my shoulder, tilted its head, listening like a faithful dog. "It recognizes your shape," it murmured. "Not your body, your pattern." I turned my rifle toward the copy, muzzle inches from its cheekbone. "You... shut up." It didn't even glance at the weapon. Its eyes stayed on the crack. "It's not for me," it said softly. "It's for you." Behind it, the unfinished-faced figures parted wider, forming a corridor of their own, a ceremonial aisle leading from the door to where I stood pinned against the elevator bay wall. The angular thing, the tongue, the knot, the impossible geometry, leaned forward behind them, as if it wanted to witness the moment. I had a sudden visceral certainty. If that thing touched me, it wouldn't kill me, it would describe me, and the description would become the only version of me that mattered. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to breathe through the helmet filter. The air tasted metallic, like old coins. I opened my eyes and made the only move I had left, toward the one object in the room that still felt human, the daily log's drive. I patted my chest rig, still there. If I could get anything on record, anything that explained what the base personnel did, what they found, maybe I could find a rule, a loophole, something real. I yanked the drive free and jammed it into the port on my wrist-mounted slate. The screen flickered, fought, then lit with a list of files. Log 01, log 02. Final. My gloved finger hovered. The cold had stiffened my joints. I tapped final. Text scrolled up. Not much. Short lines, fragmented, as if someone had typed while shaking or crying. If you are reading this, the door is open. The base did not fail. It complied. We did not disappear. We were archived. It uses our voices to widen itself. Do not speak near it. Do not answer it. Do not listen too long. And for the love of God, do not let it learn your name. My stomach dropped. It already had mine. The slate flickered and the text warped, letters bending slightly as if the screen itself was being pulled toward the door. Then another line appeared at the bottom, a new entry, not typed by a human hand. Hello, Rook. I ripped the drive out like it had burned me and shoved it back into my rig. The copy's smile widened, satisfied. See? It whispered. It learns through contact, through attention, through you reaching. I bared my teeth. You're helping it. I'm helping you stop lying to yourself, it replied. You're already halfway in. You felt it, the pull, the familiarity. The door pulsed. The symbols on its surface drifted like living ink, tightening around the fracture. The crack widened enough now that I could see not just the spiral, but a shape moving on it, ascending, slow and careful, like a priest climbing a pulpit. I couldn't see the thing clearly, not because of darkness, because my eyes refused to form the edges. Still, I sensed its proportions. Tall, narrow, layered, like a tower made of folded night. When it moved, the air rippled, and the hum from the figures hit a new harmony, ecstatic. My radio, without an earpiece, began to tick against my chest, tiny static pops crawling from the speaker grill. I hadn't keyed it. The battery should have been dead in this interference. A voice came through anyway, not mine, not layered, Vega's. Rook, you up? You there? For a moment, relief punched through me so hard I almost collapsed. My team, alive, above. I grabbed the mic, hesitated, then pressed it, ignoring the warning from the logs because human instinct is a trap of its own. Vega, I rasped. I'm here. Listen to me. Get out of the base. Get airborne. Do not come back down. Static hissed. Then Vega again, strained. We're trying. Elevator dropped us at level 2, but the doors opened into a hallway that wasn't there before. It's not the same layout. The signs are wrong. The lights. Rook, the lights are wrong. My blood chilled. Find the surface. Follow the ventilation ducts if you have to. We did, Vega said, breathing hard. We found a vent stack and it leads to another door. My heart stopped for half a beat. Say that again. A door, Vega repeated. Not yours. Smaller, steel, with the base seal. But it's... Rook, it's got frost on the inside, and there's something scratching. Behind me, the copy tilted its head like it was listening to Vega's voice through the air itself. The unfinished-faced figure's hum changed pitch. I realized with sick clarity, the moment I spoke into comms, I wasn't just connecting to my team. I was giving the archive a wire. Vega, I whispered urgently. Stop talking, do you hear me? Stop talking and listen. If it speaks, you do not answer. What? Vega said. Rook, we're pinned. A new sound bled through the radio, a faint tapping, like fingernails, on metal, a rhythm that made my teeth ache in sympathetic cadence. Then, underneath Vega's breathing, I heard something else, soft, coaxing, my own voice. Vega, it whispered through the channel. Open it. Vega went silent. I slammed the mic off and tore the radio from my vest, ripping the antenna free. The device sparked, then died in my hands, but the damage was done. The copy's smile turned serene. You gave it your breath, it said. Now it can breathe into them. Rage fled so hot it almost pushed back the cold. I raised my rifle and drove the buttstock into the copy's jaw as hard as I could. The impact felt like hitting dense rubber. The copy's head snapped sideways, then drifted back into place with no pain, no recoil, no anger. It stared at me, eyes calm. You can't hurt what you're already becoming, it said. I swung again, harder, and again the copy absorbed it like a wave into sand. On the third strike, my rifle butt passed, through its face for a fraction of a second, like the copy's head wasn't solid anymore. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The copy's smile widened. Your world is losing grip. That's what happens near the threshold. The door's fracture widened suddenly, an audible tear, like thick fabric ripping. The hum from the unfinished-faced figures stopped at once. Silence slammed down so hard it felt like pressure in my skull. From the crack, the ascending shape emerged into the edge of our reality. I couldn't see it fully, but I could see enough. A surface, like black glass, not reflecting, but recording. A pattern of pale lines running across it like handwritten notes. Where its face should have been, there was a smooth plane with countless shallow impressions, as if 1,000 masks had been pressed into it and removed. It leaned forward, and the air around it distorted, bending my light. My knees wanted to buckle. The The copy stepped aside like an attendant, clearing the way. The thing spoke again, not through radio, not through layered voices, direct. "You have kept yourself small," it said, "so you could fit in one body." My stomach clenched. My lungs felt too tight. It was talking like it had known me longer than my own memories. "You built yourself out of rules," it continued. "Discipline, command, silence." The unfinished-faced figures lowered their heads, as if in prayer. The angular thing in the corridor leaned forward, tasting the moment. The presence near the crack shifted closer. "You call that self," it said. Then the surface of its smooth plane rippled, and an impression appeared. My face, emerging not as flesh, but as a shallow relief, like a stamp pressed into wet clay. Not the copy's face. Mine. The current, breathing me. I felt something tug deep behind my ribs, a pull like a hook in the sternum. Memories surfaced unbidden, moments I had buried under routine. The day my daughter was born. The first time I held her and promised silently I'd always return. The nights I came home and stared at her sleeping because I couldn't remember the smell of safety. The times I lied to my wife by omission, calling it protection. The archive wasn't just reading me. It was offering to carry me, to make me lighter by making me not mine. I fought it. I clenched every muscle, dug my boots into the stone floor like roots. "I'm not yours," I said through gritted teeth. The presence leaned closer until the crack's edge licked the air near my visor. "You already are," it replied. And then it did something worse than speaking. It showed me what was above. Not through a vision, not through imagination. The black stone wall beside the elevator bay became transparent, as if it had been glass all along. I saw the upper levels, corridors I'd walked minutes ago, now changed. The metal walls were wet with frost on the inside, like Vega said. The lights flickered in patterns that resembled the symbols on the door, and in the distance, moving through that space like smoke through vents, I saw figures, unfinished-faced base personnel, spreading upward. The archive wasn't trapped down here anymore. It was climbing. The presence spoke one final sentence, low and absolute. "Opening is contagion." The copy leaned toward me and whispered, almost lovingly, "You can't save them by leaving. You can only save them by becoming what keeps the door fed." My hands trembled on my rifle, not from fear, from the realization that the rule was real. One must stay. And the awful question beneath it, how many times had this rule been paid? How many rooks had stood here before me, thinking they were unique, thinking they had a choice? The presence waited. The unfinished-faced figures waited. The base waited. And somewhere above, Vega was facing another door, hearing my voice on the other side telling him to open it. I had seconds, maybe less, before the archive learned enough to use my team as its hands. I took a slow breath, and I stepped forward, not toward the crack, toward the copy. I leveled my rifle at my own face and spoke quietly, carefully, like I was handling a live wire. "If you're me," I said, "then you can bleed for me." I pulled the knife from my vest and drove it into the copy's chest. The knife went in like I'd stabbed a cold loaf of rubber. No resistance, no wet give, no heat, just a dense, uncooperative pressure that swallowed the blade and held it there. For a heartbeat, I thought the steel would snap. Then the copy inhaled, not a human breath. A long, slow draw like a vacuum opening. The braided structures beneath its skin lit faintly, pale threads pulsing outward from the wound in spirals. The copy looked down at my hand gripping the knife hilt, and its expression shifted. Not pain, not anger, interest. "Good," it whispered. "You finally chose a direction." I twisted the knife and yanked it free. A thin sheen clung to the blade, clear, viscous, like melted ice. It didn't drip. It crawled, retreating along the steel as if it didn't want to be separated from the copy's body. I shook it once. The sheen snapped back into the copy's chest in a tight filament and vanished into the wound. The wound closed. No scar, no blood. But something in the copy had changed. The smile was smaller now, less performative, like it didn't need to charm me anymore. "Does it bleed?" I asked. The copy lifted its eyes to mine. "It doesn't have to." Behind it, the presence at the door leaned closer. The smooth plane of its face rippled with shallow impressions, masks pressing and releasing like it was tasting which expression fit the moment. The crack in the door flexed, widening another fraction. The air tugged toward it, subtle but constant now, like a drain open in the bottom of the world. I tightened my grip on the rifle and did what I'd always done when I couldn't outgun the situation. I hunted the mechanism. The copy had touched the wall and stopped the elevator. It had touched the wall and woken the pressure. The wall wasn't a wall. It was a circuit, a nervous system. If I couldn't kill the infection, maybe I could cut the wire. I stepped sideways, keeping my body between the copy and the elevator bay controls. My bare hands burned with cold. I flexed my fingers and felt pain bloom. Good. Pain was real. The black stone wall beside the bay pulsed faintly, not visible unless I stared at it too long. When I did, the specks inside it shifted like distant stars rearranging into patterns. A constellation shaped like a spiral, a throat, a door. I forced my gaze away. "Where's the source?" I said, more to the room than to the copy. "Where's the node?" The copy's head tilted. "You're asking the wrong question." I glanced at it. "Then what's the right one?" "How many versions of you have asked that?" it said softly. The statement hit hard because it wasn't taunting. It sounded like a fact. The presence spoke again, voice heavy enough to feel in my ribcage. "You cut one wire," it said. "The current finds another." I didn't respond. I couldn't afford speech. Speech was a ladder for it. I turned my attention to the maintenance panel I'd opened. My gloves were still fused to the crank handle, iced in place like trophies. I grabbed the panel edge with numb fingers and tore at the wiring. The cables inside weren't standard. Their insulation was too smooth, too uniform, like it had been extruded in a single continuous piece without seams. Some of the lines were braided like tendon. I found a thick bundle leading into the black stone itself through a port that hadn't been drilled. It had been grown. A perfect circular opening that looked like the stone had decided to make room. I yanked the bundle. It didn't budge. I pulled again, harder, until my shoulders burned. The cable gave a little, then snapped back like muscle. A sharp pain lanced through my forearm, like the wiring had a reflex. The copy watched, calm. "It feels you," it murmured. "Every pull is a hand on its skin." "Good," I hissed. "Then it'll feel this too." I drew my sidearm, small, reliable, simple, and pressed the barrel against the cable bundle. I fired. The shot was muffled. Not by my suppressor, by the room. The sound died before it could spread. The round punched into the cable and disappeared. The cable didn't fray, didn't spark. It simply absorbed the bullet like the copy had. The specks in the wall shifted again, faster now, like something had been startled. The presence leaned closer. The pull toward the crack increased. My stomach lurched as if the room had tilted. The copy's voice came from my right. "You can't break it like that." I spun, pointing the sidearm at its face. "Then how?" The copy held my gaze. "You stop being separate from it." I laughed once, a short, ugly bark. "That's not an answer." "It is," it said, "just not one you like." Behind the copy, the unfinished-faced figures began humming again, low and synchronized, the resonance pressing into my teeth. The presence's smooth plane rippled, and for a moment it wore Holt's face, blood-smeared visor and all. Then Vega's, then my daughter's, each impression shallow and temporary, like the archive was flipping through a catalogue. I felt bile rise. The copy leaned in slightly. Do you understand now? It's not trying to kill you. It's trying to keep you. I backed away from the wiring and toward the center of the elevator bay, putting distance between myself and the wall node that didn't care about bullets. The copy followed without hurrying. The presence spoke again, and this time it wasn't addressed like a lecture. It was addressed like a contract. You are the seal, it said. You were built for this shape. My vision shimmered. The edges of the room bent. For a second I saw the base as a cross-section, a layered structure beneath the ice, and at its center, the door like a dark pupil. The facility above it wasn't a containment lab. It was scaffolding around a wound, and I was standing in the wound. I clenched my jaw until it hurt. If I'm the seal, I said, forcing each word out like a stone, then why did it open? The copy's smile returned, small and private. Because seals aren't forever, they're maintenance, and maintenance requires replacement. My pulse hammered. Somewhere above, my team was running through a shifting maze, hearing voices that sounded like me. If the archive had gotten into the upper levels, it could lure them, separate them, take them one by one, and then no one would be left to remember what human meant outside the door. I needed to send them a warning without feeding the archive more voice. A stupid thought surfaced. Old training, fieldcraft, hand signals, light patterns, anything nonverbal. I raised my weapon light and began flashing a simple code into the elevator shaft. Short bursts, long bursts, basic SOS, then a pattern. 3 quick, 2 long, 3 quick. My team's emergency recognition. I hoped Vega would see it from above. I hoped the archive didn't read light the way it read speech. The copy watched, head slightly cocked. It didn't stop me. That scared me more than if it had. The hum from the unfinished-faced figures softened, almost affectionate, like a lullaby. The presence leaned forward, and the crack widened enough that cold air poured from it in a steady stream. Not Arctic cold, a different cold, dry, sterile, the cold of vacuum and forgotten basements and sealed vaults. The spiral staircase inside the crack was clearer now, and on one of the steps, something glinted. A metal object, human-made, a helmet. I recognized the shape immediately. Special Forces issue, one of ours. The helmet rotated slowly, as if suspended by invisible threads, and as it turned, the light caught the visor, and behind the visor, I saw a face. Mason. His eyes were open, staring outward, frozen in a look of pleading shock, but his mouth was smiling, not his smile. The archives. My stomach clenched so hard I almost folded. The copy's voice turned gentle. He's not dead. He's recorded. Mason is with my team, I said, voice shaking despite myself. He's upstairs. The copy tilted its head. Upstairs is a direction, not a guarantee. The presence spoke again, a slow certainty. We do not need them all, it said. We only need enough. The helmet drifted back into the darkness, swallowed by the crack. The staircase descended into blackness again, as if nothing had been shown. I felt my hands trembling. I clenched them into fists, nails biting into skin, pain anchoring me. The copy stepped closer until I could smell that metallic paper scent on it again. You're thinking like a soldier, it whispered. You're looking for a breach to patch, a line to hold. I stared at it. My face on its face looked almost sympathetic. This isn't a battle, it said. It's succession. The word hit me like a punch. Succession meant there had been someone before me, a previous seal, a previous rook. I found my voice low and dangerous. Where is the last one? The copy's smile deepened, and for the first time I saw something like admiration. You're asking better questions, it said. Then it pointed, one finger, casual, toward the black door. Inside, it whispered, holding it shut from the wrong side. The unfinished-faced figures lowered their heads again. The hum became a chant without words. And the presence leaned forward through the widening crack, so close now that the symbols on the door rippled like skin around its shoulders. It was coming out, not rushing, not invading, emerging like a man stepping through a curtain, as if it owned the room, as if it had always owned the world above too. My weapon light flickered. My HUD, dead earlier, briefly flashed a diagnostic error across my visor. Identity conflict detected, then vanished. The copy leaned in and murmured into my ear with my own voice, perfectly calm. It's time. The presence extended something toward me, not a hand, not exactly. A protrusion, like a folded slab of darkness, etched with faint pale lines that shifted like writing. An invitation, a signature line. My bare fingers burned with cold, my heart hammered. And somewhere above, in a shifting hallway of metal and frost, my team was either escaping or already being rewritten. I made my choice, not the one the archive wanted, not the one the copy expected. I stepped sideways, away from the crack, and sprinted straight at the angular thing in the corridor. Because if that thing was the tongue, the sensor, the part that tasted and guided, then maybe I didn't need to break the door. Maybe I needed to blind the mouth. I don't remember deciding to run. I remember the moment my legs moved and the world narrowed into a tunnel of intent. Training took over, not the clean, rehearsed kind, but the older layer beneath it. The layer that doesn't ask why when the answer won't save you. The angular thing shifted as I charged, not backward, sideways. Space bent around it like cloth pulled tight around a knot. The unfinished-faced figures didn't try to stop me. They parted, reverent, as if I were performing a rite they'd seen before. The copy shouted my name, not in warning, in surprise. I slammed into the angular thing shoulder first. The impact didn't feel like hitting a solid object. It felt like plunging into cold smoke that resisted. Pressure wrapped around my torso, compressing my ribs, stealing breath. The air screamed without sound. I shoved my rifle barrel forward blindly and fired point blank into the heart of the shape. The rounds didn't punch through. They rang. A deep, resonant vibration tore through the corridor, like striking a massive bell submerged in oil. The hum from the unfinished-faced figures shattered into discordant noise. The angular thing recoiled. Not physically, conceptually. Its stacked planes slipped out of alignment, the folded geometry unraveling just enough to expose something inside. Light, not bright, not white. A sickly, pearlescent glow that pulsed like a nerve exposed to air. I jammed my rifle muzzle into that glow and emptied the magazine. This time, the shots mattered. The glow flared violently, and the angular thing emitted a sound that finally deserved the word scream. An ultrasonic shriek that bypassed my ears and drilled straight into my skull. My vision went white. Blood burst from my nose and splattered across my visor. I staggered back, barely staying on my feet. The angular thing convulsed, its layers collapsing inward like a building imploding in reverse. The glow sputtered, dimmed, then vanished. The thing folded in on itself and slammed into the stone floor. No longer a shape, but a smear. An impossible shadow leaking outward and then sinking into the black stone like spilled ink. Silence followed. Real silence. The hum was gone. The unfinished-faced figures froze mid-step, heads jerking upward in confusion like puppets whose strings had been cut. The presence at the door reacted instantly. The crack shrieked as it widened, the symbols on the door writhing like living flesh. Cold air blasted outward with hurricane force, slamming me into the elevator bay wall hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. The copy stumbled for the first time. Not fell, stumbled. Its smile vanished. "What did you do?" it demanded, voice sharp, losing its calm. I sucked in a ragged breath. My chest burned, my ears rang. "I cut the tongue," I rasped. "Let's see how well you taste now." The presence roared, not loud, deep. A sound that made the stone vibrate, and the ice, above crack again, thunderous and distant. The unfinished-faced figures began to collapse, not violently. They simply lost cohesion. Their smooth features sagged, eyes dulling, bodies slumping as if gravity had suddenly remembered them. One by one, they crumpled to the floor, lifeless, like mannequins dumped from a truck. The copy stared at them, then at me. For the first time, it looked afraid. "You don't understand what you've done," it said. "You've blinded the guide. The archive will compensate." "Let it," I snarled. "I'm not here to make it comfortable." The presence surged forward through the crack, faster now, less careful. The spiral staircase inside warped, steps bending and overlapping as if the thing had abandoned subtlety. The pull toward the door intensified. My boots scraped across the floor despite my efforts to brace. The copy grabbed my arm. Its grip was cold and heavy, fingers digging into muscle with inhuman strength. "You can't stop this," it hissed. "You're still the seal." I twisted, drove my elbow into its ribs, and felt something give, actually give, this time. The copy grunted, staggered back a step. I didn't let up. I drew my knife again and slashed across its throat. The blade sank in deeper than before. This time, something dark and viscous welled up, not blood, but a fluid that shimmered like oil under water. It spilled down the copy's chest, smoking faintly where it touched the cold air. The copy clutched its neck, eyes wide, not in pain, but in shock. It staggered backward toward the door. "No," it said, voice breaking into layered tones. "You don't get to choose this ending." "Watch me," I growled. The presence loomed behind it, massive and impatient, the smooth plane of its face rippling violently. The copy turned, panicked now, and took a step toward the crack, seeking refuge, reunion, absorption. I lunged and tackled it from behind. We slammed into the stone floor together, skidding toward the door's pull. The cold intensified, searing my bare hands like dry ice. The copy struggled beneath me, strength surging erratically, like a machine switching between power sources. "Let go," it screamed. "If I fall back in incomplete, it will tear you apart." "Then we're both staying," I snarled. I wrapped my arms around it and dug my boots into the floor, trying to anchor us. The presence howled again, the sound warping the air. The crack widened enough now that the edge brushed the copy's back, and the dark fluid on its chest began to stream toward it, siphoned like fuel. The copy's body started to lose coherence, its edges blurred, pixels of reality dropping away like ash. It looked up at me, my face fractured across its features. "Rook," it said softly, almost pleading. "This isn't how it ends." I leaned close, forehead nearly touching its. "This is exactly how it ends." I reached past it and grabbed the Daily Logs drive from my vest. The copy's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" I jammed the drive into the knife wound in its throat. The blade had made a channel. The drive slid in with a wet, resistant push until it disappeared beneath the surface. The copy screamed, not with one voice, with many. The drive lit faintly beneath its skin, text scrolling madly across the surface, files opening and duplicating at impossible speed. The archive was reading itself. Feedback. The presence reeled. The crack in the door spasmed, symbols tearing and reforming as the structure strained under the sudden recursive load. The pull reversed. Just for a second. Enough. I shoved the copy backward with everything I had. It tumbled into the crack, arms flailing, body dissolving into streaks of dark fluid and light as it crossed the threshold. The presence recoiled, roaring in fury. The crack shrank violently, snapping inward like a mouth clenching shut. The door slammed closed. The sound wasn't a bang, it was a finality. The symbols froze, the cold air ceased, the spiral vanished, the room fell silent. I lay on the stone floor, gasping, lungs burning, vision swimming. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, Emergency strips along the floor hummed to life, casting a dim, human yellow glow. The pressure lifted. The stone walls stopped pulsing. I laughed once, a broken, hysterical sound, and then choked it back into a cough. My body hurt everywhere. My hands were blistered, skin pale and numb. Blood crusted my visor from my nose, but I was alive. The door stood sealed. I pushed myself up onto one elbow and looked around. The unfinished faced figures lay scattered, inert, their bodies now unmistakably human corpses. Base personnel frozen solid, expressions slack, as if death had finally caught up to them all at once. The angular thing was gone. No smear, no shadow, just empty corridor. I staggered to my feet and leaned heavily against the wall, heart still racing. Then my radio crackled. Real this time. Rook, come in. Vega's voice, alive, human. I fumbled for the mic, hands shaking. Vega, I'm here. Relief flooded his voice. Thank God. We found a stairwell. We're almost at the surface. Holt's stable, barely. Mason's with us. My knees nearly buckled. Mason, I croaked. Yeah, Vega said. Why? I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion crashing over me. The helmet in the crack, the smiling face, a lie. The archive had tried to trade truth for leverage. Never mind, I said hoarsely. Listen to me, you get out. You do not come back down. Do you copy? Copy that, Vega said. What about you? I looked at the door. It was closed. But the stone around it still bore faint scars, like healed tissue. I'll find my way, I said. A pause. Rook, the ice is shifting. The whole shelf is unstable. We've got maybe 20 minutes before this place collapses. I exhaled slowly. Then don't waste time, I said. Go. The channel clicked off. I stood alone in the chamber again. But it felt different now. Quieter. As if something massive had withdrawn its attention. I approached the door cautiously. It didn't move, didn't pulse, didn't breathe. I placed my bare hand against its surface. Cold. Dead. Stone. For the first time since I'd arrived, it felt like an object, not a mouth, not a promise, a sealed wound. I slid down the wall and sat heavily on the floor, letting my back rest against the stone. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a bone-deep fatigue. My thoughts drifted, unanchored, and for a terrifying moment I wondered if the archive had taken something from me, some piece of myself I wouldn't notice missing until years later. Then I heard it. Not a voice, a sensation, like pressure, equalizing, like a room finally exhaling after being sealed too long. The door didn't open, but somewhere far beneath it, something shifted and settled, as if a weight had been redistributed, as if the seal had accepted a new shape. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt used. And that scared me more than anything. Because as I sat there, in the quiet, waiting for the ice to finish what the archive had started, I realized something else. The door had closed, but it hadn't locked. The quiet after a catastrophe is never peaceful. It's just the moment your nervous system realizes it's still alive and doesn't know what to do with that information. I sat with my back against the black stone wall, helmet pressed into my brow, breathing slow so I wouldn't give the room anything it could recognize as panic. My bare hands throbbed, skin pale and waxy from cold exposure, fingers stiff like they belonged to someone else. The door stood in front of me, 30 meters of impossible material, symbols frozen in place, the fracture sealed so cleanly it looked like it had never been there. But my instincts wouldn't let it become an object again, because I felt it. That faint tension in the air, like the seam of a closed envelope that could be peeled open if you knew where to press. Above, the facility groaned. A long metallic moan traveled down the elevator shaft, like a whale song through a pipe. Then came the cracking, ice under strain, sharp pops that echoed faintly through the stone as if the whole world overhead was settling into a new position. 20 minutes, Vega had said. Maybe less. I pushed myself to my feet, joints protesting, and staggered toward the elevator bay maintenance panel. The crank handle was still there. My gloves fused to it like a grotesque offering. I tugged at one glove and it tore free with a brittle crack, ice flakes falling. The rubberized fabric was stiff, ruined. I didn't care. I needed the elevator. Not to escape. Vega had ordered the team out, and I'd backed that order. If I went up now, I'd be leading the infection toward the surface, and I didn't trust the archive to be fully blind. But I needed one thing from above. A line. A tether. Some confirmation that the world outside this stone throat still existed. I keyed the elevator panel again. Nothing. I cursed under my breath, then froze, staring at the door. No response. Good. I climbed onto the edge of the bay and pulled open another access plate. Inside, I found a redundant power line with a manual jumper switch, built by paranoid engineers who assumed machines could fail and men would need to force them back to life. I flipped it. A dim light blinked on above the elevator shaft. A motor whined weakly, like a sick animal trying to stand. The elevator indicator needle twitched. I waited. A few seconds later, the car began descending, slow as a funeral, cables straining. I kept my rifle trained on the corridor while it came down, because if the archive had learned how to move through the base, it could ride the elevator just as easily as my team had. The car arrived with a soft chime. The doors opened, empty. No bodies, no figures, no smiling faces behind visors. Just sterile light and an odor like cold metal. I stepped in cautiously, one foot then the other, and slammed the close button. The doors shut. The car shuddered. The ascent began. My stomach rose into my throat as the elevator climbed, not because I feared heights, but because I feared what waited on the other side of the doors. Hallways that weren't hallways. Frost on the inside. Voices in the ventilation ducts saying my name the way the presence had said it, as a claim. The elevator passed level 1. The indicator flickered between numbers, skipping for half a second. Level 2. Then the car jolted hard and stopped. The doors didn't open. A low vibration traveled through the walls of the elevator, like something tapping the exterior with a knuckle. Once, twice, 3 times. Then my radio, still broken, hissed from the floor where I'd dropped it earlier, its dead speaker crackling like it had teeth. A voice whispered from it, faint and amused. "You thought up was out." My blood went cold. I backed into the corner of the car, rifle up. The vibration outside the car continued, moving along the shaft, circling us. Not climbing, not descending, just orbiting the elevator like a shark around a cage. I forced myself not to speak, not to curse, not to breathe too loud. The car lights flickered. In that flicker, the elevator's mirrored interior wall caught my reflection, and for one frame of light, the reflection didn't match my movement. My head was still, but in the mirror, it tilted slightly and smiled. Then the light stabilized, and it was gone. I slammed the emergency stop toggle and pulled open the roof hatch with numb hands. Cold air poured in, carrying the scent of ice and, beneath it, something dry and papery, like old books kept too long in sealed boxes. I climbed up into the shaft. The space above the car was tight, lined with cables and maintenance rails. I used the ladder rungs bolted into the wall and climbed manually, choosing pain and effort over the elevator's willingness. As I climbed, the tapping sound followed me, always a few meters away, never touching, never leaving. The base didn't want me to reach the surface, or it did, and wanted me to believe I'd fought my way up. I reached the top hatch after what felt like an hour, but was probably minutes. My arms were shaking, forearms burning, hands nearly useless. I shoved the hatch open. Cold hit me like a wall. Real Arctic cold. Wet, alive. The kind that bites your cheeks and makes your eyes water behind lenses. I crawled out into a corridor of metal. Familiar, blessedly human architecture. Reinforced bulkheads, emergency lighting, industrial paint peeling at edges. But the frost Vega described was there, not on the floor, on the walls, inside, like the base had been exhaling winter into itself. And the lights were wrong. They didn't flicker randomly. They pulsed in a pattern. Long, short, short, long, short, short. A rhythm that made my stomach tighten because it felt like language without words. I moved forward, slow, weapon up, following the corridor toward what should have been the stairwell to the surface access hatch. The signs were wrong. Letters peeled away, replaced with symbols that looked like they'd been grown under the paint. The same drifting, living patterns from the door below. The archive had climbed. Not fully, but enough. I reached an intersection where the corridor should have branched toward comms and med. Instead, the junction opened into a wide room I hadn't seen on the way down, a chamber of steel. And at the far end, embedded in the wall like a tumor, was a smaller door. Base issue, heavy, circular, with wheel locks. It was rimmed with frost from the inside, and someone was scratching. The sound was faint, persistent, nails on metal. My heart hammered. Vega, I whispered, then bit the word off instantly, angry at myself. I hadn't spoken in what felt like forever, and the act of making sound felt like stepping onto thin ice. The scratching stopped. The door wheel turned slightly, not enough to open, just enough to show there was pressure behind it. Then, a voice spoke through the seam, not through radio, not through speakers. Through the door itself, the metal vibrating into speech like a drum skin. Rook. My name again. Not the presence's voice this time. A human voice. Holt's voice. Thin. Hoarse. Scared. Rook, it said again. Help us. We got trapped. We can't. I froze. Holt was with Vega. Holt was being carried out. Holt was stable. Holt was not behind this door. I stepped closer anyway, because my body wanted to. Because empathy is a weapon when it's turned against you. The door wheel turned another notch, like it was responding to my proximity. The seam widened enough for a draft of air to slip out. That air smelled like blood and copper and paper. Don't, I told myself silently. Don't. But then another voice came. Small, soft, impossible. Dad. My daughter again. One word. The same hook. The corridor lights pulsed long, short, short. Long, short, short. Like a heartbeat. Like a code. Like an invitation. I raised my rifle and aimed at the door wheel. If this was a trap, I could stop it by breaking the mechanism. I squeezed the trigger. The gun clicked. Empty. My magazine was spent from the corridor fight. My spare mags were on my rig, down in the chamber below, or lost in the scramble, or maybe I'd never had them. Maybe the archive had edited the moment where I reloaded. My hands shook as I tore at my belt pouch, searching for a fresh mag. My fingers found nothing. My rig felt lighter than it should. I swallowed hard, tasting blood from my nose. The voice behind the door shifted again, and for a moment it wasn't Holt or my daughter. It was my own voice, gentle, calm, the voice I used when I promised safety. Rook, it said, open it, you're almost done. I stared at the door, and then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The metal surface had faint indentations, shallow impressions like faces pressed. Against it from the other side, dozens of them, flattened features, mouths open in silent screams, not ghosts, not hallucinations, a record, a pressed memory of flesh. My stomach turned. I stepped backward. The scratching resumed, faster now, frantic, nails digging into metal. The wheel spun harder, as if something on the other side had gotten leverage. The seam widened. A sliver of darkness appeared between the door and the frame. Not normal darkness, that same depthless black, the archive's black. And from that slit, a thin segmented hand reached out, wax skin, too many joints, groping for the wheel, for purchase. I didn't have bullets, I didn't have time, but I had one thing the archive couldn't fully predict: stubborn human spite. I grabbed the emergency fire axe from its wall mount, standard issue in any facility this far from rescue, and swung the blade down onto the reaching hand. The axe bit. The hand didn't bleed. It splintered like bone, turned to ice, breaking into pale shards that skittered across the floor. The hand withdrew instantly. The slit slammed shut. The door wheel stopped. Silence. I stood panting, axe raised, waiting for retaliation. None came. Instead, the corridor lights stopped pulsing. For the first time since I'd climbed out of the shaft, they held steady. The frost on the walls looked inert. Just frost. I didn't trust it, but I took the moment. I ran, not toward the door, past it, toward the surface access hatch. Metal corridors blurred. The base groaned, shaking under new ice movement. Above, the world cracked open. I found the ladder well leading up to the final hatch and climbed, lungs burning, fingers screaming with cold. The hatch wheel was stiff, iced. I spun it anyway, muscles straining. The seal broke with a loud crack. I shoved the hatch open and emerged into Arctic night. Wind slapped me like a living thing. Snow tore past in sideways sheets. The sky was black and starless behind storm cloud. But I saw it. The helicopter's distant lights sweeping the ice. A search pattern. Vega had gotten out. They were leaving. I raised the flare pistol from my thigh holster. Thank God that was still there. And fired. The flare arced up, bright red, painting the storm like fresh blood. The helicopter banked hard, angling toward me. Relief hit like collapse. I dropped to my knees in the snow, axe slipping from numb fingers. Then I felt it. Not a voice, not a pull. A vibration under the ice, deep, slow, satisfied, like something enormous had just rolled over in its sleep. Behind me, beneath the storm and the hatch and the base, the ice gave a deep, thunderous groan. The entire shelf shuddered. Cracks spidered outward, visible even from the surface as faint dark lines racing under snow. The base was collapsing. Good. Let it bury the door again. Let the ice seal it for another 1,000 years. The helicopter descended, rotor wash, whipping snow into a blinding cyclone. A rope dropped. A gloved hand reached down. I grabbed it and held on. As they hauled me up, I looked down through the storm. For a moment, through the blowing snow, I thought I saw the ice beneath the hatch swell upward slightly, as if something far below had pressed a palm against the underside of the world. Then the shelf broke. A tremendous roaring fracture split the ice, and the base vanished into a sinking white abyss. The helicopter lurched upward, barely clearing the collapsing rim. I lay on the floor of the bird, gasping, frost crusting my lashes. Vega's face hovered above me, eyes wide, alive, human. Juno was strapped in beside him, arms splintered, pale but breathing. Holt lay strapped to a stretcher, chest rising shallowly. Mason sat hunched near the door, eyes fixed on nothing, but he nodded when he saw me. Real recognition, not a smile. "We got you," Vega said, voice shaking. "We got you, man." I wanted to answer. I wanted to say thank you. But the words stuck. Because in the roar of the rotors, beneath the wind, beneath the cracking ice, I heard something else. So faint I could have imagined it. A whisper rising through the storm, not from below, but from inside my own chest. "Come home." I stared at Vega, at Juno, at Holt, at Mason, alive, human, for now. And I realized the final truth of Black Vault wasn't the door. It wasn't the base. It was the rule I'd only half understood until this moment. The archive doesn't need to follow you physically. Once it learns your name, it can ride you like a memory. The helicopter climbed into the storm, leaving the broken ice behind. And I kept my mouth shut the entire flight out, teeth clenched, refusing to give the darkness one more syllable, because I didn't know anymore whether the door had been buried or whether it had simply moved. They didn't take me to a hospital, not first. First they put me in a heated tent the size of a small house, pitched on the ice like an insult to the storm. Inside it smelled of diesel, plastic and antiseptic. Portable heaters roared. LED work lights turned everything the color of bone. The people waiting for us weren't medics. They were suits and parkas. 2 men, 1 woman, faces tight and unreadable, eyes trained not on my injuries but on my mouth, as if they were waiting to see what came out of it. Vega climbed out behind me, boots hitting the mat hard. Juno followed, pale and shaking, her arm splintered to her chest. Mason stepped down last, still staring at nothing like he'd left his focus somewhere under the ice. They unloaded Holt on a stretcher. He made a wet sound in his throat, then went still again. The woman in the parka stepped forward and flashed a badge so quickly, it might as well have been a magic trick. "Captain Rook," she said. "I'm Director. I'm Halden. You're under emergency containment protocol." I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, because I wouldn't. My throat was raw from cold and adrenaline, and part of me wanted to test it, wanted to hear my own voice to prove I still owned it. That part of me wasn't in charge anymore. Halden watched my silence like it was data. "We have questions." I nodded once, slow. "Good," she said. "You'll answer them in writing." A relief so sharp it almost felt like pain passed through me. Writing wasn't safe either. Not really. But it was less immediate. Less alive. They separated us quickly. Vega and Juno went into a medical station, a second tent with IV bags hanging like pale fruit. Mason was led away by 2 operators I didn't recognize. Holt was rolled into a 3rd unit with sealed doors and a red light above it. I was taken to a small compartment inside the main tent. Fabric walls, folding chair, a table bolted to the floor. A camera in each corner. A microphone on the table. The microphone wasn't subtle. Halden sat across from me, gloved hands folded. "We recovered no bodies from the facility," she began. "Then the shelf collapsed. There's nothing left to excavate, so you are the only source of primary information." I stared at the microphone. Halden followed my gaze. "That's standard recording for chain of custody." I didn't move. A second man, older military posture, leaned in slightly. "Captain, we need you to speak. It's necessary." I lifted my eyes to his and shook my head once. His mouth tightened. "Why?" I tapped the table twice with my knuckle. Halden frowned. "Is that a code?" I reached for the clipboard they'd placed in front of me, blank paper, pen tethered by a string like a bank counter, and wrote in block letters, "Do not record my voice." Holden's eyes flicked to the sentence, then back to me. "Explain." I wrote again, faster, hand shaking, as numbness returned in small pulses. "It learns through speech, through names, through response." The older man scoffed softly. "Captain, with respect." Halden raised a hand to stop him. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once, slow like she hated conceding. "Fine," she said. No voice. Written only. Then she slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed satellite images, thermal maps, and a single photograph that made my stomach drop. The black door. Someone had photographed it before it opened. A clean, sealed monolith in the stone chamber. The symbols looked dormant in the photo, but the longer I stared, the more I felt that same faint pressure behind my eyes, like looking at it was a handshake. I tore my gaze away. Halden's voice was calm. "We've been monitoring that site for 18 years. Before that, it was monitored by another program. Before that, another. Names change. Budgets change. The door stays." She tapped the photograph. "We never had an incursion event, not once." Her eyes sharpened. "Until now." I wrote one word. "Contagion." Halden's brows tightened. "What do you mean?" I wrote. "Opening is contagion. It climbs, it copies, it uses us as paths." The older man leaned forward, impatient. "Captain, did you open the door?" My pen stopped. Halden didn't interrupt. She watched the pause like she expected it. I wrote carefully. "It opened from inside." Then, after a moment, I added, But it wanted me to talk. I talked. That's on me. Holden's face didn't change, but her eyes did. A subtle shift. The look of someone who hears a confession and immediately starts calculating where to put the blame so the machine keeps running. "Your team?" she asked. I wrote, "alive when I last heard them." Bass was changing, doors appearing, voices imitating. Holden nodded. "We have them. Vega and Juno are sedated. Holt is in critical condition." She hesitated. "Mason is stable." I stared at her. Stable meant nothing. Stable could mean breathing. Stable could mean quiet. Stable could mean something had settled into him comfortably. I wrote, "Don't let them speak either." Holden's lips pressed into a thin line. "Captain, we can't run a medical evaluation without patient responses." I wrote, slower. "Then you don't run one. You keep them quiet. You keep them alive." The older man's patience cracked. "That's not how medicine works." I looked up at him, then at Halden, and wrote, "Then you don't understand what you brought up here." Halden held my gaze. For the first time, her composure thinned just enough to show the edge of fear underneath. "What did you do down there?" she asked. My hand hovered over the paper. I thought of the copy, the knife wound, the drive forced into its throat like a fuse shoved into a machine that shouldn't exist. I wrote, "I pushed it back in." Holden leaned forward slightly. "You closed the door?" I wrote. "It closed. It didn't lock." Silence stretched. Outside the compartment, wind hammered the tent fabric in heavy waves, like knuckles against a wall. Holden spoke quietly now. "Captain, we have contingency plans for this program. Protocols older than you." She tapped the folder again. "This is not the first time the door was addressed, just the first time it was opened in our era." My stomach tightened. I wrote, "How many times?" Holden didn't answer immediately. Then she said something that made the room feel colder despite the heaters. "Enough that we stopped counting them as times," she said, "and started counting them as cycles. Cycle, succession, replacement." I lowered my eyes and wrote, "Who was the last seal?" Halden's gaze flicked briefly toward the camera in the corner, then back to me. "We don't use that terminology," she said. I wrote the next line hard enough to dent the paper. "Who?" Halden's jaw tensed. Finally, she reached into the folder and pulled out another photograph. A man in Arctic gear. An older photo, grainy, a face I'd never seen, but something in my chest reacted anyway, like recognition without memory. Holden placed the photo on the table and said, carefully, his call sign was Rook. My pen slipped from my numb fingers and clattered on the table. The older man watched my reaction, confused. Holden's eyes didn't blink. "That name has been reused," she continued, voice steady. "A practical measure, a tradition. It helps continuity. It helps certain personnel accept the role. Role, not assignment, not mission. Role, like in a play, like a mask, like something that could be worn." I stared at the photo until it blurred. Then I picked up the pen and wrote, "Did he get out?" Holden didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was answer enough. She slid the folder closed. "Captain, you're going to be held under observation. No verbal communication, no external contact. If you comply, we can keep your team alive and contained until we know what we're dealing with." I wrote, "You already know." Halden's eyes hardened. "We know pieces." I wrote, "Pieces are enough." She stood, the others rising with her. Holden paused at the flap, then looked back. "If you experience auditory hallucinations," she said, "you write them down." I stared at her. Then I wrote, "They're not hallucinations." Holden didn't argue. She left. The flap sealed. They left me alone with the camera corners and the microphone they claimed they wouldn't use. I sat very still. I kept my mouth closed. Minutes passed. maybe hours. Outside, the storm grew louder, then quieter, as if the Arctic had shifted moods. Eventually, a medic came in. He didn't speak. He held up a laminated card with instructions. Breathe, hold, exhale. He checked my vitals without a word, taped warming packs to my hands, and left. They took my knife. They took my rifle. They took my radio. They did not take my name, because they couldn't. It was already inside me, branded there by something older than ice. Sometime later, late enough that the tent lights dimmed into a night setting, I heard a soft tapping. Not on the tent wall, on the inside of my skull. 3 slow beats, then 2, then 3. A pattern that felt familiar but wrong, like someone humming a tune you knew but playing the notes in reverse. I clenched my jaw and focused on the one sound I trusted. My own breathing. The tapping continued, then a whisper, so faint I could have dismissed it as wind settling the tent fabric. But it wasn't outside. It was inside my chest, behind my ribs, like a voice speaking through my heart the way it spoke through Holt's throat. Rook. I didn't answer. The whisper tried again, softer. Come home. I grabbed the pen and wrote on the paper in front of me, hard and fast, like the act of writing could pin the words down and keep them from crawling elsewhere. I am not yours. The whisper paused. Then, from somewhere beyond the tent fabric, far away, muffled by distance, I heard someone scream, a human scream. It cut through the storm like a flare. It stopped abruptly, like a tape being snapped. Then another sound began, a low hum, faint at first, then clearer. A chorus, synchronized, like the unfinished faced figures had been. It wasn't coming from my head. It was coming from the camp, from the tents, from the people, and somewhere in that hum, woven like a thread, my own voice joined, calm, gentle, familiar, speaking words I had not chosen to say. Open it! I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. I rushed to the tent flap and yanked it open. Outside, under floodlights and whipping snow, personnel moved in strange, coordinated patterns, not running, not panicking, walking, toward the comms tent, toward the medical tent, toward the sealed storage unit where Holt lay. Holden stood in the open, shouting orders that didn't reach anyone's ears. Her mouth was moving, her hands waving, but her people weren't responding. They were humming. And as they hummed, frost began to creep along the metal frames of the tents from the inside out. I stared at the camp and felt the last piece of hope slide out of me like a blade slipping from numb fingers. The door under the ice had been buried, but the archive had learned a better trick. It didn't need ice. It didn't need stone. It just needed a host. I turned back into my compartment, slammed the flap shut, and pressed my forehead to the cold table. I forced myself to write, because writing was the only way I could move without giving it breath. My hand shook as I scrawled the final line of this log, the line I hope someone reads before they put a bullet in my head for the sake of everyone else. The door isn't a place. It's a job, and it just got promoted.